I'd like to thank everybody for coming to our academy. We've been trying to run these pretty much on a monthly basis, although we took a little hiatus over the summer. So we have a number of them going on through the fall that are planned. They're on the website. We're going to be doing HF. We're going to work on power supplies and power poles and power safety. And then we're also going to do VHF and repeaters. That's what we have scheduled for the fall. If you have any ideas for things that you might want to see, let us know. There's a sheet floating around. And check it off, and we'll be planning on spring things. If you have expertise in a particular field and would like to help, let us know. This is all about sharing knowledge and having some fun and, you know, learning things and playing with toys. We're lucky enough today to have Mike Moore come in and do our DMR presentation, and I hope to learn a lot. And I hope you guys do too. And as soon as he's ready, we're going to go.
So good morning, everyone. I didn't really brief Scott on this, but somebody knows more than I do is going to help us today, and that's Steve Verzulli, Ka1CNF. And what he brings to the party is system fusion. And we're going to talk about the three common digital modes, D-Star, DMR, and system fusion. And kind of contrast the three modes, and hopefully help you decide which one you might want to do. I suspect that the biggest obstacle that people have with this is programming the radios. Is that true? Is anybody?
The biggest obstacle is the checkbook.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, you're going to be a DMR man, right? So. So let me see if the presentation is coming up here, and if not, I have it on disk. Unless you want to start, Steve, if you're ready to show something.
Yeah.
While I fumble here.
Jump into the. I can explain what I have here.
Yeah.
We could probably plug the screen into my laptop later, but I have several hotspots, and what they are, they're connected to the internet and then RF to your radio. So there's a software program called VHF Digital, and it's running right now on this Raspberry Pi Zero wireless with a Zoom spot board. And I can get into it just like a URL or web page and control the hotspot from computer, phone, or tablet. I can also run it. I run this mobile in the vehicle with a power bank, and then use my hotspot to connect to the internet. And this will do 4 digital modes. It'll do D-Star, Fusion, DMR, and P25. They just added something new, mainly for folks in Aries Races, and they got the pager mode set up on it now. And I just got this yesterday to start playing with. So this will act as a receiver and transmitter. There's a worldwide pager frequency, and that's programmed into the pager. So excited to see what that's going to bring. This is another hotspot. You may have heard of this. Shark RF is the company, and it's called OpenSpot. And here's another Zoom spot on a Raspberry Pi 3 board, a bigger board, but it provides the same function. And what I've got here is a small screen connected, and this will tell me what mode I'm running. It'll display the call sign, and on DMR it will display, if it's in the contact list, it will display the person's name and address and city and state.
SharkBite isn't available right now. They've discontinued it. They said they're going to come up with another one, so they haven't come up with one yet. Now, the first one you talked about there, where did you get that from?
There's many sources, but I like to go to official sources. This one came from Ham Radio Outlet. Okay. They're selling it as a complete package. I think it's on the sale thing. Yeah, it's on the sale
Feature.
thing, 120 or something like that.
And-
You can actually do cheaper if you buy the parts yourself. There's people that sell the Zoom board that will put it together for you.
What was the particular name of that one?
This one here
Yeah.
is Zoom Spot, ZUMSPOT.
It's right at the top of the HRO
Yeah.
ad online.
You know, at eBay or AliExpress, you can get something called a Jumbo Spot from China. It's a clone or a copy of the Zoom Spot. It requires different firmware. I know the Pi-Star people really support this Zoom Spot board. They have a wiki, webpage, forums and stuff, and it's real easy to upgrade the software and the firmware on this. With the Zoom Spot board that I have, there's extra commands, and you have to be careful updating the firmware because it is different. And some of the politics of this is, the Zoom Spot is open source with a GLC license. Scott, you probably know about this open source stuff
Yeah.
more than I do. You know, companies have copied the Zoom Spot board and design and started marketing themselves, which I guess
I understand some of them
is a big
don't
no-no.
work real well.
My Zoom Spot does not work all that well. But you know, it was $55 or $60 compared to $100. So if you want a cheaper board, that's a way to go, but expect some problems and issues with it.
That one on the end there that I brought, that rugged
Oh.
spot,
Yeah,
that is the guy's in California, and he'll actually configure it, including your SSIDs, your radio IDs, etc., and it does all the different modes. It has a little screen on it. It's using Pi-Star as well, but it's supposedly working out of the box. And I opted to do that because I didn't want to play with
yeah.
all the different compatibility issues.
The open spot, as the gentleman mentioned, it's not available anymore. This was basically plug and play as well, and you can get into the web page here and configure it. This wasn't cheap though. This is about $200 when it came out, and it's not wireless. You have to connect it to an Ethernet port. And I have an Ethernet adapter down here, but it's not connecting to my hotspot for some reason, but I use this at home. They have announced the Open Spot 2, which will be wireless. It'll be compact. It won't have this antenna. It's got some new features to it. It's supposed to be available in the autumn, but I'm not sure when that is, and I haven't seen a price on it yet either.
But if you want to take it in the field, you're going to want wireless so you can hook it to your phone.
And would you say that the Pi-Star, the first one you say, is that one comparable in price, or how's that one?
This one here?
The first one you said you were using, I think you called it a
The
Pi-Star
Zoom
Digital.
Spot.
Yeah, the Zoom Spot, yeah.
That's a Zoom Spot.
Right. It's a Zoom Spot board mounted to a Raspberry Pi
Right,
with the Pi-Star software.
and that would go on to a Raspberry, any version of the Raspberry Pi?
Any version. Here's a Pi 3.
Okay,
It'll go on a Pi 2, but I understand it won't work with the Pi 1, the original Pi. This has a little faster processor, a little more memory, so it's faster, a little faster in accessing the web page. It doesn't make any difference in transmitting and receiving. This, more compact, cheaper, but a little bit slower because the processor speed and memory is less than the Pi 3. The Pi 3B Plus, which came out a couple of months ago, they haven't updated the Pi-Star software, so I'm hearing reports that some people get it to work, other people don't. So if you buy the latest and greatest Raspberry Pi B3 Plus, your Pi-Star may or may not work. They call it experimental software right now. On it.
When they come out with a new version of the Pi, they have to recompile the operating system because the prior version doesn't know about the new hardware and things are addressed in a different way. So it has to be a respin of the operating system. So I think I'm running now. I tested the presentation on the Mac OS Wednesday and it worked. So I went to the Mac OS today. The reason I'm fumbling back and forth is I want to demonstrate the programming software, and that runs on Windows. So, hopefully we can get these things together. So what I basically have here is an introductory presentation where we talk about the three modes in an overview sense, and then switch off to one for D-Star, one for DMR, and one for System Fusion. I'm interested in System Fusion presentation because I've never seen that before, or that operating. So this is a title I stole off the internet. I thought it would be interesting. Which one is right for you? Because who has a digital radio now? And who has D-Star? Who has DMR? And who has Fusion? Okay, great. So we'll just talk about the three modes. And it's basically what I said. It's curious that we have three different things, right? But they developed at different times in different manufacturers. But there's a lot of commonality. It's just they're not interoperable. So D-Star, I've been into D-Star for probably five or 6 years, and that's what the name means, and it's the oldest, right? D-Star was conceived by ICOM, a little bit of the history. They came up with the idea, and the Japanese government gave them some money to do a study to design a digital mode for ham radio. And this was done in Japan. One of the goals was to make it as narrow band as possible. The narrow band was an idea that they wanted D-Star to have. And they wrote a specification. I think the specification was completed in '99. And in 2004, I think, ICOM came out with some add-on boards that went into some of their existing radios. You bought that as an option. And a little bit after that, there was a fellow, Ray, what's Ray's last name? The D-Star guy.
Novak?
Yeah, Ray Novak, yes. Was in Japan. He saw it, and it really turned him on. He says, you got to bring that to the U.S., and there was some push and pull because they never really planned to roll it out worldwide. And he did get it brought. They donated a bunch of gear to a ham club in Atlanta, Georgia D-Star Association. And they got their hands on it, and it had, the digital, it had callsign routing, and immediately they discovered that it wasn't as complete as they wanted it to be. So a fellow, Robin Cutshaw, I think it's K4RC or AA4RC, took apart the whole protocol, and it went from D-Star to something called D+, which added some additional routing capability, and that's really what kind of took off in the U.S. So DMR, it came about from a European standard, and it's mostly was developed in the U.S. by Motorola. Moto Turbo was what they called it, and it exists largely in the commercial world. And it's recently become into use in the amateur community. System Fusion, that's the newest. How long has that been around, Steve?
2013.
Okay, so that's developed by Yaesu. In fact, I've seen on a lot of the boards they call it YSF, but I just call it Fusion. And Yaesu builds the radios for that mode. So we're going to hopefully talk about the differences between the three modes and the similarities. So the biggest difference between the three is the vocoder. Interestingly, it all seems to be done nowadays with the same chip, just with a different encoding scheme. And the vocoder is the piece that takes the digital audio and jumbles up the bits. I think of it as mostly compression, so that the signal operates with with a controlled bandwidth, and the 3 vocoders are not compatible. In other words, if I picked up a DMR radio and called Steve on his D-Star radio, he wouldn't be able to understand me. So interoperability is an issue that's being addressed today. The connection method is different between the 3 modes. With D-Star, you actually connect from your radio to another repeater. So in other words, you make a connection and then you talk over the connection that you made. With DMR, the connection is more like a party line, is how I would understand it. You talk to a node using what's called a color code and a talk group number, and that gets linked in a server to the other station. But you don't actually make a connection to that station ahead of time. The connection method is active all the time. And YSF, Steve, how do they connect from node to node?
There's several ways of doing it. They have their own wires X, but you can do it through hotspots as well.
Okay.
Or just standard simplex or through a repeater. There's really no difference. You set up your radio and set it to a frequency and transmit.
Okay. There are repeaters and there are hotspots, and all 3 have repeaters and hotspots. I was reading the slide ahead. So all of them have dedicated repeaters. In Rochester, there, I believe, are 2 D-Star repeaters, KB2VZS out in Fairport and W2XRX in Chili. There are 2 repeaters in Ontario County. Actually, Hemlock is probably Livingston County, but they're the SciArt group for D-Star. In Rochester, I have heard of 2 DMR repeaters. There's KD2FRD, which I'm told is near Ladder Road. And the owner of that repeater, Don, told me that it's an experimental repeater. But I've connected to that and talked to him from my hotspot, and I've also talked to him on the air directly from outside. And hopefully we'll hear something on that repeater today. And the Fusion repeater is at
Bald Hill for the Xerox for the VHF one, and over at Roberts Wesleyan College for the UHF.
Okay. And so those are the repeaters locally. And the next thing that a lot of people have is multi-mode repeaters and hotspots. Yeah.
Mike, can I add that for Wayne County, the Drumlins group has several Fusion repeaters and a multi-mode repeater as well.
Okay, I wasn't aware that they had Fusion. I thought it was just the multi-mode.
Fusion on UHF and VHF.
Okay.
And then a multi-mode on UHF.
Right.
I can get into that more.
Yeah, we're going to get into it, and a very unique thing about Fusion is that it supports analog and digital, and it's smart enough to make the switch back and forth.
The radios are set up, all the ASU radios are set up
for that.
to switch
Yeah.
automatically,
We're going to talk a little bit about radio programming. I struggle with that, so to me that's the most difficult part of it is to get your radio to do what it is you want. Hopefully we'll get to a point where we have enough maturity with digital in Rochester. I know a lot of places that you can go and download a code plug that's all set up for your state or your area, and I think we want to be able to get to that.
Anybody that's coordinating that, or is that just kind of good news?
Well, to be quite candid, I don't think we have enough. We have not had enough operation in the area to do that. SciArc has at least some files that you can download from their website. And do you know about Wayne County? Do they have code plug?
No, they're just getting started in DMR because they
Yeah.
were heavy into Fusion.
When I got started in DMR, what I did is downloaded the Ontario code plug. I mean, there's a lot of use of DMR and D-Star, and I'm not aware of Fusion, but there's a lot of digital work west of us and northwest of us. And I actually drove over there and took my radio and operated a little bit to see who you could talk to. And what I have done with my hotspot is clone some of that. So I was going to start with DMR, talking about DMR, because I think that that's the newest thing that people were interested in, but I'm just guessing that.
I would say DMR is the newest and it has the most questions.
Yeah.
Save Fusion for the last because, in my opinion, it's the easiest and quickest
Okay.
to get set up with.
Interesting. This is working differently, but that's okay. So we talked a little bit about what DMR is. It's a European standard. We've heard the words Moto Turbo. I remember when the Motorola radios started first showing up in the ham ads, real tiny radios and very cute. And it's about the same bandwidth as FM. And in my opinion, it's probably the easiest to listen to, but then again, I haven't heard Fusion, so I may change my tune. I find it difficult to listen to the D-Star transmissions. But here are some examples of the DMR radios. The one that I have, and probably a lot of people have, is the Pitera MD380. I mean, these are like $90 or even less. I've seen some radios for $60, so that's one of the big attractions for the handheld radios. Does anybody have a mobile DMR radio? What do you have, Steve?
The Connect Systems 800D.
Okay. And have you, the owner, Don, of the KD2 FRD system says that basically on his mobile DMR system, he can cover the county on his repeater.
He didn't used to, but whatever he did, the signal at my place in Walworth is much stronger.
Okay.
And I can get into it reliably now.
And you must be able to get into the N2 MKT.
Yes.
What's the coverage of that like?
Well, definitely western, eastern Monroe County and most of Wayne County.
N2 MKT is a multi-protocol repeater that's located in SOTUS. And I think that is the biggest interest of what you're going to see happening in Rochester. I mean, a lot of people are talking about multi-protocol repeaters and hotspots. And when those start to become more prevalent, you'll be able to use any of these modes on the repeater. It's just that you won't be able to talk to from one protocol to the other. And we're going to talk about what it's going to sound like, but that is a real compromise, multi-protocol. And the fourth thing that there's some interest in adding is a regular analog voice as one of the protocols. That's being developed as well, and it's just a question of somebody to put it up in Rochester. So there's manufacturers of the DMR mobile radios, and the TYT 9600 is just under $300. That's about the cheapest of the mobiles, do you think?
Yeah, the Connect Systems went on sale at Christmas time. That's when I bought it. It was like $280 or $289 or something like that.
Yeah, $279 is what the TYT goes for. So that's kind of the going rate for a mobile radio. Help me with this. These are some of the DMR definitions, and these are things that need to be programmed into the radio. The first is called a color code, and in order for you to hear another station, the color code has got to be set either to be admit all, which means you don't care about which color code, or you've got to be listening on the color code that is set. And it's described in literature as being like, think of it as a PL, where two people can share the same everything else, and but you can use the color code to keep the squelch closed and not hear the other station. Of course, you can't transmit on top of somebody else, but at least it allows you to selectively use that parameter, and you would find the color code for a particular repeater from the repeater owner, and these are numbers like color code 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's like the CTCSS, the 110.9.
Yep.
That opens up this, to get into the.
It's the same
Analog,
functionality, right? It's just one of the digital.
And I think there's 16 of them, but most of them use either 1 or 2.
Yeah. Time slot is important in DMR. On DMR, the bandwidth actually has two 30-millisecond time slots, so that your voice is encoded to digital. It is vocoded by the DMR vocoder, and then it's sent in a much shorter time than in real time. So there are two time slots that exist in a DMR channel, and so because there are two time slots, you literally can talk over somebody else, because the DMR protocol will support two conversations at the same time. There's talk group. A talk group is another way of selecting the signal to go out to a destination. And there used to be relatively few talk groups, and these are just numbers that you program into the radio. And your hotspot or your repeater sends the signal to a server with that talk group number, and that's how you actually connect to somebody else. For example, talk group 2 is, and I think talk group 9 are for local communications. Talk group 1 is for worldwide. So if you set your radio to talk group 1, it goes literally everywhere. There are some tactical channels that are like talk group 310, talk group 311. These are like a big party line, and there again, your signal goes literally everywhere. When you're starting out, like I got an email from somebody that said, please don't use talk group 310 on my repeater. And I'm thinking, I wonder why that is. And then I thought about it. When you use that talk group, that's plumbed everywhere in the world. So you want to select a talk group that is targeted to who you want to work. In Monroe County, our talk group is 31369. So, like if you get onto KD2 FRD, you are automatically connected to talk group 31369. And a lot of the 3136 numbers are New York. So there's an upstate New York talk group, and we're going to see those in a minute. There is a New York City talk group. There's an Adirondack talk group. And this is just a way of you targeting who you're going to connect to.
Hey, Mike,
Yeah.
Can you talk, let me get ahead of you on the slides here, but when you're looking at the repeaters, can you talk about the fact how all the repeaters that are on DMR are connected through a server, right, or a server network?
Yes.
So that's across the world.
That's a point well made. There are two repeater networks that are used on DMR. There's the Motorola network 3. Okay. I'm going to ask you what the third one is. The Motorola network has existed for a long time. The Moto Turbo network. I don't think we have any Moto Turbo repeaters here.
closest, I think, is in the Adirondacks of all places. They have several up there.
Yeah, and those networks are, the repeaters are connected through bridges, and there's a hierarchical mechanism for a connection, so that if you're talking local, your signal is only on the local repeater. You can go to a regional talk group, and it gets promoted up as far as it needs to talk to the repeater that you want to talk to. And I'm really only talking about what I've read, because I've never operated on a DMR turbo network. The more common thing, and oh, by the way, the Moto Turbo network was fairly limited in terms of how you were able to connect, because it was small, so you could easily swamp it. And it existed before the days of hotspots. In Europe, the Brandmeister group came up with a new system of linking repeaters, and that's what most of the people are on. And we're going to look at the Brandmeister network in a minute. But basically, that accommodates, that is what accommodates the hotspots. It keeps the whole system from being swamped, because it allows your hotspot to talk directly to the network server, and it greatly expanded the numbers of talk groups. There are probably thousands of talk groups now, and that's enabled the proliferation of hotspots to work.
A
Yes,
little
Steve?
side note, the DMR mark is mostly Motorola people. And
Yeah.
I hate to use the word snotty or whatever, but they won't let people, it's their network, and they won't let hotspots connect to their network, and that's why these others, the third one is DMR Plus. That's why DMR
Okay,
Plus and
yes.
Grandmaster came into
Yeah,
being,
yeah.
is mainly for the hotspots and interconnect all these talk
So
groups.
can you, I don't want to get ahead. You have a repeater that serves a wide area and also repeats to that area.
Yeah.
And then you have a hotspot that will serve 400-foot radius or something like that.
Yep.
So it's like but it's a little access point, but both of them can be access points to the network.
Correct.
Whether it's Brandmeister or
Yes,
Moto
yes.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
When you connect and talk on a talk group, you don't know, you could be connected to literally hundreds
Yeah, hundreds
of
at a time,
repeaters
yeah.
around the world.
Yeah.
And that your transmission comes out over every one of them.
And in practice, too, we didn't really talk about this, but many of the talk groups are push to talk, okay? So what that means is, if you are monitoring on a repeater, and let's say you want to be on talk group 1, 2, 3, 4, the repeater won't make that connection until you transmit on repeater 1, 2, 3, 4. Or talk group 1, 2, 3, 4. Or the same thing holds true in your hotspot. So what will happen a lot of times is people, for example, I can have my handheld on my hotspot set to TAC 310, which is one of these big party line groups. I've got to transmit and then listen, or it's not enabled on my radio. And many times you'll be hearing some guys in a QSO, and somebody else will just come over top of them and give their call sign because they didn't listen first. So in order to listen on the talk group, you have to enable it. I find that frustrating. And to Steve's point too, snotty is probably the wrong term, because it's really self-protection, because it was a limited kind of thing. It was designed for, like, I'm going to say, like the local power company to use, the little DMR network, not thousands of amateurs worldwide. So it's more of a self-protection thing as far as the DMARC limitations. Yes?
I want to be sure I understand that with the way this works, that if you just wanted to listen to a particular group, it's not like with the analog radio, if you just turn it on and if there's somebody talking, you can start hearing that. If you wanted to hear that group, but not necessarily transmit, you'd have to push the talk first.
Yes.
In order to listen.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's exactly how it is. And D-Star is the same kind of way, except you always have to make a connection in D-Star. If you want to listen to a particular net, wherever that net resides, you need to make that connection before you can hear anything. Yes, Steve?
It's just a quick key.
Okay.
Just do it. And when you're listening to DMR on a talk group, you hear a lot of beeps, beep, those are all people that are doing quick keys,
Okay.
okay? And if you have the Pi-Star software, you can see all their call signs coming up. They transmit for a second or a second and a half.
And so because your call sign would show up on the computer, you're not breaking FCC rules by not vocally identifying this.
Well,
And your
there's
call sign.
a couple, DMR people will say, even though you have a DMR ID, which Mike will get into, which is tied to your call sign. So that the DMR ID is transmitted, and then there's a lookup table to get your call sign.
Okay.
So the DMR people say you don't have to. The Fusion people, where your call sign is also transmitted every time you key the mic, say that it's good practice
Okay.
to identify was it every 10 or 15 minutes.
Has the FCC said anything about
I
this?
have not
yet?
seen anything where they have weighed in, or the ARRL says it's always a good idea to follow the FCC rules.
I haven't seen the FCC quoted on this, but here's what I have read, is that because in D-Star and in Fusion, your call sign is encoded in the transmission on the radio. So it's said there that there's not a requirement to identify on those two modes. In DMR, your call sign is not transmitted, okay, on the radio. So it's said there that you are required to voice identify on DMR.
Yeah, just your
In-
DMR ID is transmitted.
Yeah, yeah. In practice, though, it's everybody identifies more than they need to because, we're just accustomed to that. We're accustomed to giving a call sign. But I believe that quick key that Steve described is probably not in keeping with the spirit of the rules.
So
But
Except that it's more.
it is more
problematic.
efficient, yeah.
Well, it's more problematic
Yep.
because now you're gonna have.
Yeah.
So once you've opened a channel, say with a repeater, does that time out after 10 minutes or something if you don't talk at all?
Yes,
So it'll transmit everything on that
for a
node or
time
whatever.
period. Yeah.
Is that a long time or a short time?
Yeah, I don't know what the time is, and that's the KD2 FRD. That's the repeater in Greece on Ladder Road. So and I believe that was Don. I've never met
Yeah, that's
Don.
Don, yeah.
I've never met him, but
He gave a presentation on DMR and at the Rochester Repeater Group.
okay. So we talked about the DMR ID, the radio ID is a number it's a 7-digit number.
Turn this down.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
This one's on. Can't tell because he didn't identify himself. But we have his number.
DMARC used to give the registration numbers. You would just go and apply, and they would associate one with your call sign. And I think they were swamped because of all of the inexpensive radios that people were buying. And now there's a different organization that has given out those numbers. And this is a link. I think this has the real location on it, but it's easy to find. If you type register my DMR ID, you'll be led to a page and you enter your call sign.
RadioID.net is where
Okay.
you register, but if you go to the DMR Mark now, they'll have a link to the page.
Well, that didn't work.
Just went to the next slide. Well, I just did it about 6 weeks ago. It takes about 3 days at this point to get an ID back.
Yeah.
So that gets programmed into the radio?
Yes.
Yeah, you program it in the radio, but the idea is that there's somebody arbitrating, giving out unique numbers so you don't clash.
It used to be based on geographical area, and then there was the first 3 numbers were your location, and then the last 4 numbers are just given sequentially. And I read that that's not working out because they're literally running out of
running out
numbers.
of
So
numbers.
we'll probably have 8 numbers before too long. So you get that number, you stick it in your radio, and that identifies you. And you'll also find in the radio programming where people have contacts lists of DMR IDs. In other words, like my radio would have a contact defined as KC2NM 3136592. There's no routing that I've read about in DMR. In other words, you can't find somebody by their DMR ID by typing that in. And it's not selective calling. In other words, if somebody called 3136592, it's not going to turn my radio on. But what that allows you to do is, like when you look at the panel, and if Steve called me with his DMR ID, his call sign, if I had it programmed in, would show up on my panel. So it does identify in that way.
Is that also unique to each radio if a user has multiple radios?
I don't know the answer to
No,
that.
they recommend only one
Per user.
ID assigned to you, and you program that into all your radios. If you have more than one hotspot, what they recommend in order to keep track of them through like Grandmaster, they recommend putting, you start out with zero at the end. You get another hotspot, it's 01. Another hotspot is 02. That way, Grandmaster can keep track of it, and the network can keep track of it.
At the end of your ID?
At the end of your ID. And that's just programmed into your hotspot. You program that in your hotspot. You still have your DMR ID, you just add the 2 digits.
There's enough
on
fields,
the
enough fields for that.
Yeah.
And so the next thing is a code plug. The code plug is really the configuration that goes in your radio. And that is made up of we're going to talk about this further, but zones and contacts and channels and scan lists, and I think that's all that's involved. Don't get stung.
Yeah, the code, I want to mention too, Mike, the CPS is a term that's used. It's the code plug software.
Oh, really? I thought that was something that belonged to TYT.
No, it's everybody.
I'm glad I
using the
came
term
today.
now. You download the
It's another
CPS,
TLA.
for your radio.
Yeah.
What is that? It's a code plug software.
Yeah, okay. So, and there's another two, this is another push-to-talk kind of question, is that there are things called static talk groups that are always available and dynamic. And the dynamic are the ones that respond to push-to-talk.
I guess I didn't quite catch that. So, with the talk group, the static ones, you don't have to key it in order to
Correct,
hear?
yeah, like 2 and 9, which are local talk groups.
Okay.
You will always hear somebody on the local repeater. But the dynamic ones are, you have to key it to have the repeater or the hotspot connect to that dynamic talk group.
A little further on that, I don't want to get too complicated, but the PipeStar software, I've enabled the Grandmaster API, which allows me to set up static talk groups. I can have 5 of them set up per, or whatever for the hotspot, and I can control it from my phone. So anytime anybody talks on any of those, if I have 5 set up in there, it'll come through on my radio. And I can turn them on and off depending upon the time of day or whatever. It's useful for some of the nets. Some of the nets may be on a certain talk group at 8:30 on Monday nights, and I want to hear just that talk group come in. So at 8:30, my Grandmaster, self-care will tell my and working with the PipeStar software to just listen to that talk group at 8:30.
So if somebody's already enabled a particular talk group on the repeater, are other people, do they have to key in, or will they actually hear it? Is it repeater-based, or is it actually device-based, as far as whether you're in the talk group or not?
Well, it wouldn't be on your radio. In other words, if you are listening to a repeater, you're going to hear what's on that time slot and color code.
Okay.
So,
Let's say there's talk group 200, and you haven't keyed into it, but somebody else has.
yeah, I'm sure you would hear it.
You would hear it.
I would like to make that,
Radio blocks, talk groups you haven't keyed into, it's the repeater doesn't actually transmit.
right, yes.
Okay.
What would happen you know, I got the 16 zones set up here for my hotspot or a repeater. If somebody's broadcasting on 31369 Monroe, but I have one of my 16 zones set to a different talk group, I won't hear anything, but the LED will light up. And that tells me that there's a talk group transmitting on that frequency. I would actually have to rotate to the zone with that same talk group number in order to hear the conversation.
But you
Or-
never key.
But I never keyed. You don't have to key, but if you turn it to that. To change your Pi-Star or your hotspot, a quick key will automatically change it, but you still have to have the zone, the right zone for that talk group. That's what gets frustrating for me a little bit with DMR, is you have to use the software to program, oh, there's a new talk group, oh, I don't have a program in my radio. Okay, I've got 16 zones, I've got 13 of them programmed, the 14th zone, same frequency, same color code and everything, but it's a new talk group for me.
Now, would a scan list
Yes.
operate differently?
That would, if you have your receive contact set up and your scan list and your radio set up for that talk group, then you can hear it. It'll come through with the scan. Or using on the 380, the tools, the MD380 tools that there's something called promiscuous mode, which will let you hear.
That always appealed to me.
That'll let you hear everything.
That's all practice safe
You
radio.
don't have to have your radio programmed into the talk group, just put it into promiscuous mode and you'll hear everything.
So, Mike, do the message, if you're on your hotspot or on a repeater, does it queue up messages if they're on the same? You know, if I've got like 5 different messages coming in, will they come in order then? And he's talking about different channels set up, and maybe I'm not asking the right question, but
Your radio won't.
the radio won't, but
But
the
this-
hotspot will, and
The hotspot won't, but you can go to their server, the Brandmeister server, and I believe it's got a history of conversations.
Yes, it records everything.
well, that's another topic, but the question was this, if I've got, 5 different conversations going on that are coded on different channels on the same frequency, is my hotspot going to basically time those things to the
No,
radio?
You
or how
can't
does it
have
work?
more than,
Yeah,
you
there's
can't
just,
have 5 going on at the
just 2.
same time.
Just 2.
Just
Yeah.
2, either time slot 1 or time slot 2.
yeah.
But it doesn't actually stop and dispatch the message a second later when the
No.
channel opens.
But you can go to Brandmaster, if I wanted to, I type in Mike's DMR ID number, gives me a last heard, it'll tell me where Mike last keyed up or transmitted on, the time and date and what talk group.
So if 2 people on 2 different hotspots running through the same network key at the same time, then they're not stepping on each other.
No.
It's gonna work that out, and somebody's gonna go first and someone's gonna go second.
It'll only, you're right, it'll only hear one at a time. There's no FM capture effect, it's,
So does it
whoever-
throw away the one that lost, or does it
Yeah,
queue it up?
it just throws it away.
So essentially, you can key and not be heard.
Right,
Okay.
and that happens a lot with the nets.
Yeah, yeah. And there are many times where and in D-Star too, the message just doesn't go through.
Okay.
I talk to my brother every day. Most of my experience is on D-Star talking to my brother. And many times, there'll just be a big gap in the conversation, and what he said didn't come through.
Part of the DMR header, the digital header, like when you're getting the repeater, you can key up. If the repeater didn't hear you, you get a no good signal back. If you got in the repeater, then you get, okay, I got in the repeater.
So there's an actual handshake that goes on.
Yes.
Yeah. Steve, what do you think this slide shows 2 different representations of the DMR time slots?
Yeah, but it's all time.
Yeah.
Because the way that it's 30 the radio switch and the repeaters and hotspot switch, you're on time slot 1 for 30 milliseconds, and then you switch to time slot 2, and then back to time. It's always doing that time slice. That's how you get 2 signals that are 6.25 kilohertz wide on the same channel. The channel is 12 and a half, but you get the 2 time slices.
Who's the arbiter of the synchronization of that? Is that the
That's
repeater or
part of
the
the
hotspot?
ET standard there for that. And that's why you gotta be careful. If you're looking for a radio and you see a used radio on the market, and you come across like a Radio Oddity GD55, don't buy it, because it's only tier 1. That was the Chinese first into, and they didn't read the spec or interpret it correctly, so that transmits on both time slots at the same time. And if you do that into a repeater's owner is gonna ban you, because that will wipe out the conversation on the other time slot. And, so there's those kind of things. But they evolved and finally, they're now tier 2 compatible, which is the 2 time slots. There's tier 3 as well, that's trunking, that will probably never become an amateur radio again.
In Don's repeater, KD2FRD, he wants us to use time slot 1 on talk group 31. What did I say it was?
31369.
31369, which is the Monroe County talk group, and everything else to be on time slot 2, so that time slot 1 is reserved for local conversations.
Is there some place that they're publishing this stuff?
It really it depends on the repeater organization. For Don's repeater, he says it's experimental and he does not have anything published. But you can certainly ask him. And it was I'll tell you what I did, because I didn't know, right? Wednesday night, I went on Talk Group 1 and talked on 310, and I had a QSO with a fella in New York City, and I was very happy right from this parking lot. And he sent me an email, and he said, I don't really want people to use Talk Group 310 on the repeater, and if you're going to use a talk group that links someplace, I said, well, how about 31361, which is upstate New York? He said, yeah, there's other talk groups, but use them on Talk Group 2. And my first response was, how is a fellow supposed to know that? But I said, thank you, I'll change my program, because he's experimenting, and it's his repeater, and there you go. So it's something that we'll have to learn.
If you go to, like, when I've operated the repeaters in the Adirondacks, if you go to the DMR Mark site, it'll have a map, and you click on the repeater like in Tupper Lake, and it'll show you the repeater owners put in. They can use 16 zones for time slot 1 or 16 for time slot 2. Usually the 1 is local, the 2 is anywhere in the world. So then you can program your radio to match up with that repeater.
That was good timing, wasn't it? So that's what a DMR signal would sound like on your analog radio. And all the other modes pretty much sound the same. I mean, there's...
Pretty close, yeah.
Yeah.
You can tell the difference.
Wonder how I get back. So I've got another clip to play you, and you're going to hear a guy talking on a DMR radio in analog mode, and then you're going to hear him talking on the DMR radio in DMR mode, and I want to contrast the difference in fidelity.
Star Wars.
So that's just a demonstration of what it kind of sounds like on DMR. And to me, DMR sounds quite a bit better than D-Star. D-Star sounds a lot more clipped. I liken D-Star to using, the first time you ever use single sideband. You have to kind of get an ear for it.
It's the next generation of vocoder.
Yeah.
Has
Yeah.
some of the different.
And it has more, more bandwidth. They use more spectrum, so there's more to hear. And one of the other things that I have found with all of the digital modes, and that is you need to key the mic and wait for some number of milliseconds, and then,
Actually, 1 or 2 seconds.
yeah, then start speaking, and people who speak quickly, I can't hear. I can't hear anyway, but I mean,
First part of their sentence is cut off.
yeah, and you hear it all the time where you'll hear part of a call sign, but there's not enough fidelity there to recognize whose voice that was, and you can't really understand what they say. So
when you stop talking, don't release the push to talk right away. Give it a second or two and then release it. And that's just because you might be going through a repeater or network, and by keying and sending your signal out, it gives all those servers and everything time to lock in.
yeah. So the important difference about DMR is that you had the 2 time slots. So I don't know if a hotspot is capable of both time slots, but certainly the repeaters are.
They are, but they recommend only time slot 2 for that. The multi-mode repeaters use both time slots. 1 is usually the local, and 2 is the network connected to all the talk groups.
From your experience, Steve, the Wayne County repeaters, do they restrict the talk groups, or do they have a recommended operating policy? They have more experience than I do, anyway.
Yeah, the multi-mode, he doesn't have any restrictions or anything. You see all kinds of talk groups coming through. The other ones, they haven't enabled the DMR. It's just Fusion or
Okay.
D-Star, because there's issues if you try and enable more than, say, 2 digital modes at a time on a repeater.
I find that in my car. This hotspot I keep in my car, and when I remember to put my Wi-Fi on my phone, this is a Zoom spot, the same one that Steve has. And what happens to me is that somebody will come on DMR, and like 30 minutes, there's a conversation going on, and because it's simplex, I'm blocked from using it. I'd really like to call my brother on D-Star, but because it's running all the time, you can't get a word in edgewise. And you've recommended changing some of the timing to help that.
Yeah, some of the hang times, but also if you program in talk group 4000, it's a disconnect, so you can disconnect that on your hotspot by a quick key with talk group 4000 programmed in.
Would that work on the other time slot? I mean, obviously, if it's transmitting all the time, it's...
Well, you're only listening to that one time slot. You have to program your radio for either time slot.
I see.
And set it up in a different channel or different zone.
I don't know if this is visible to people, but this is some of the DMR repeaters that are around over near Syracuse. This one is in Clyde, and this is the Wayne County machine, and the new one in Rochester is not shown on here, but this
That's from, repeater book.
this may be, let me see if I can click on this. This is a dynamic map that shows where, this is from the Canadian P8B. If I can zoom in here.
Yeah, while you're zooming in, just look at the numbers there. Grandmaster 1365, DMR plus 170, and DMR Mark 548, I think it was. Grandmaster has far ahead of the others.
But literally, you go to Toronto and you can walk around downtown and they have a very rich system up there, and I have every hope that we will have here when we get some of this
Can you
area.
scroll up a little bit to see the rest, because that's the repeater information, it tells you what color code, and we'll probably tell you what talk groups he has enabled on that.
Oh, you mean click on one of these?
Well, you got the
Can't-
KC8
It's cut off at the bottom.
AFH, it's cut
Yep.
off at the bottom there. You can scroll up, or that's what you need to program in your radio. If you
Oh,
want.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe not. But those are the locations you can go to if you wanna, okay, what's on time slot 1, what's on time slot 2, you know, what talk groups,
yeah.
click on that.
And there are also many lists here. Let me pick a higher one, and maybe it will be.
Can you scroll to zoom? Is it zoomed in right, or zoom out?
Yeah. It's not quick, can't get at the sliders. Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Yep. Move that over. No. There you go.
Yeah, okay. But, and, you know, for whatever reason, upstate New York was a real hole for D-Star as well. I mean, we're late to this game for whatever reason. I traveled to Virginia last summer. We took a trip down the Shenandoah Valley, and DMR was very prevalent there. And we won't drive all over the map, but if I can find myself here. But on the slide set, you know, if you click on this picture, it will take you out to that DMR map, or if you Google DMR map, that'll bring it up. There's a fella, Don, VA3 in Canada. Well, we'll look at his website in a minute, but there's a lot of DMR resources there. Very good. DMR reflectors. I don't think I've ever been on a DMR reflector. I've just kind of read about them. But they exist in a data center. Just a little slide about how to get started into DMR. And I don't say it on here, but you really need a hotspot too if you're going to use it, because there's only the one repeater until that changes.
Is that because that's the only way you get into the network? So your radio connects to your hotspot, and that's connected to
Yeah,
your...
that's your vehicle to get
And
there.
that's the vehicle for getting the data
Yeah,
on and off
yeah.
the network.
And even if you can get into Don's repeater over there, Chile or Greece, he has it set to just one talk group and you can't change it, so you're listening to Monroe County all the time.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's,
Sorry, do you see, what do you see for the futures of that? I mean, if I'm gonna invest $200, it sounds like I need to know if I, you know what I'm saying? Is there gonna be more of these DMR hotspots available to me, or more repeaters, I should say, available to me, or?
I know that Jim Stefano has an interest in a multi-mode repeater, so I think that will happen. I really don't know what other interest is. You know, my interest is mostly in D-Star.
Right.
But then again, I use that a lot with a hotspot as well.
Mike, who's the repeater over on Whitman Road? 443.05.
Yeah, I haven't been in, have you been into that? And it's, I haven't seen that listed anywhere online. But to answer both questions, I think it's a matter of people stepping up and putting up machines, or people with the will to do it.
part of the problem why DMR was late or is slow is because the DMR repeaters were basically Motorola or Hytera equipment. Very expensive, right? Not many people have that. But now you can take a regular analog repeater and attach one of these MMBVM multi-mode things to it and get your digital modes. So it's much cheaper, so you'll probably be seeing more.
What's the range on the hotspots?
Well, they all come with these dummy load antennas basically. And when I put mine up in the second story of the house, I can get out a mile or two. It's amazing.
And is that open to anybody, or how?
It can be. Right now I have my Pi-Star locked to just my call sign.
Okay.
So anybody can hear the transmissions, but they can't get into it. But it can be open. You can have
So
a.
theoretically, you can serve a small area.
Yeah.
Well, okay, and there's another way of doing this, right? These hotspots are, they use a radio chip, I think, from Analog Devices, and there's not enough spectral purity to put that on an antenna. In other words, people have said, well, why don't I put an amplifier and antenna on it? Well, the answer is there's all kinds of crap that comes out of these ones.
That's a dirty little.
Not a good idea. However, I have a hotspot at home, and we have one at RIT on top of one of the dorms, and that works very well. Right now, it's D-Star only, but I have given Jim a Pi with a different modem, and that's going to be if RIT doesn't become a repeater, they have the equipment to make the hotspot multi-mode, so you'll be able to use that on D-Star or DMR or YSF, okay? I have a wider range hotspot at my house, which has like probably a 5-mile radius, and I use that for when I'm walking. In other words, I can use the handheld and get into the hotspot. And what that is a regular amateur radio. It's a Yaesu, I think a 7800, and many of those radios had the 9600 baud data connector on the back. You come out of that connector and you go into a modem. The one I have on it now is D-Star, but I have a multi-protocol one that I'm going to put on that hotspot, and you can get a much greater range. There are hotspots like that. There's one in Victor, a fellow is operating. There's one in Waterloo. If you look at the APRS map, you'll see many of them around town. Whether they're open or not, you'd have to try it or ask the owner.
Do they overlap, and what happens if you're on the same frequency and can you actually move from one to the other like a cell, or do you get problems with them interfering with each other?
You certainly could interfere with each other. For example, I have two hotspots. I have one that generally resides in the car, and I have one that's mounted on the side of the house. One of them is 446.125, the other one's 446.150. And normally they're physically separated.
And how do you decide what frequency to use?
There's not a coordination body. I just sort of picked something that was probably within the band for simplex.
The groups have published their recommended frequencies for hotspots, because just the other day, somebody had their hotspot in the satellite subband on 440, was it 433 or something like that, and it interfered.
Yeah.
So there's certain frequencies that are recommended. That's why keep your hotspot low power. If you're around your house, you may need only 5 milliwatts, and that will be.
Yeah, I always use my ID51 on super low power.
Yeah,
it works
on
fine.
Fusion, which I'll get into later, there's recommended statewide frequencies to use. But if you have a high power hotspot, like I have a 15-watt old Motorola radio, go to Repeater Builder itself. You can enter your own information and put it up there. And the repeater councils now, the UniRepco, are recommending that even if you have a simplex, if it's high power, check with them first to make sure that the frequency is clear. If you have two hotspots that are in the same frequency close and they can hear each other, you get this looping effect going on. And basically one will transmit, one will receive.
And
when
you're
you listen
everybody's
to it,
friend at that point.
You'll hear the same thing over and over and over again.
Speaking of high power, that brings up another point when you have a hotspot. If you have your hotspot connected to a reflector, you're going to be in transmit for 10 or 20 or 30 minutes at a time. So you need to dial the power of your transmitter down quite a bit, because an amateur transmitter is not intended for key down for that time period. you'll wreck it. I keep my hotspot on 5 watts, my high power hotspot. I'm going to try to go a little faster. If you click on this link when you get home, this will take you to the code plug store for Southern Ontario, and what you'll see is all of the DMR radios, they have a code plug that you could download, and that's where I'd like to see us get when we have more digital deployment, is where you come to RaRa or some other a server and download the code plug for your radio, but it's going to take people coming up with them. This link right here takes you to a YouTube video. I just wanted to make you aware of it because it's pretty complete about how to program or write a code plug for an MD 380 radio.
We're gonna put all this on the website in the next couple of days. As soon as he gives it to me, I'll put it up.
So the code plug, when you buy a radio, you're going to get a radio, you're going to hook it up to your programming software, and we'll demonstrate that. And if anybody brought a radio and a cable, maybe we can do some of it with your radio. You're going to upload the code plug that was built into your radio and use that as the basis for your code plug. And it's going to have your serial number of your radio and really not much else, what the radio type is. And then when you get your DMR ID, there's going to be a place in your code plug to enter in your call sign and your DMR ID, and then you can load that back into the radio and then start building the code plug. And so then the first thing you're going to do when you start to build a code plug is to put in your contacts. And this is going to be a table that is in your code plug, and we'll bring up the software and talk about that. But the common talk groups can be found many places on the internet. Except I can't find it.
The internet.
I want to mention one useful talk group. It depends upon the server, whether you're a DMR Plus or Braymaster, but I think there's several of them. Like 9990 is Parrot or Echo. If you want to test your radio and hotspot, you set it to that talk group, you talk into the radio, release the mic, and it will repeat back to you what you just transmitted.
Okay, these are the ones that you'll find for New York. These are the talk groups, and you will. I'm a little bit limited because I'd hoped to be doing this in Windows, so I could actually run the software and go back and forth. But we'll have to do that as a separate step. But anyway, all of the states have their own talk groups. So, for example, my brother doesn't have a DMR radio, but for our brotherly play, I'll probably put in his Arizona talk group so that we can talk on DMR when he gets a radio. But these are the ones that are listed for New York State. And this is an example of what I have in my radio for the Zoom spot, which is my hotspot. And I have more than this, but I just showed these by way of example. I have a contact defined for Monroe C with this talk group, and this is a group call, which is one of the selections. And then I have Steve in there with his DMR number as a private call. Yeah.
You won't get me because there's a 6 missing. It's 313-6610.
Oh, okay, cool. I did get you. But again, really all this does is, like, if we did communicate, it would identify his call sign on the faceplate of my radio. In other words, it won't find him by using that number. And then, so once you have a few contacts enabled, then you define the channel information. And in the channel information, you put in the frequency, the time slot, you put in the power level, many parameters that have to do with a particular channel as well as the contact number. So you can define the channels, and when you get a radio, what I would recommend you do is you get one working. Get one contact working or one talk group working. Get one channel working and test it. And once you have a contact and a channel, then you can just add a new one and copy the old information and change only the parameter that you need. So here's an example for what I put in my radio for the hotspot. I told it it's digital. Admit criteria, that refers to the color code. So that I don't have the radio set to identify the color code receiving. I want to hear everything that's coming out. Once I get more channels and get some idea of how it works, I probably will specify the color code. I always have it on low power for the zoom spot because it's always right there. And then the channel name is something that's unique. So Monroe County Zoom Spot, that tells me it's the Zoom Spot and it's the Monroe County channel. I could have an upstate talk group Zoom Spot. I could have New York City Zoom Spot and so on if I had additional channels. And then this is the contact name that was from that other list. And then I have both frequencies for my hotspot and the color code and repeater slot that I'm going to use. And there again, once I test this and it works, I can add other channels for other contacts, and that's how I pick them. So once you have the contacts defined, which are basically the talk groups, and the channel, the frequency, and all the other parameters, then you can build a zone. Okay, a zone is a way of organizing the various channels. So it's contacts go into channels and channels go into zones. And a zone, I think this is typical, but for my radio there are 16 channels in a zone. So once I pick a zone on the front panel, then I can twist the knob and it selects each of these channel members.
That 16 is left over from the Motorola
Yeah.
days. There's new radios coming out now that will have more than 16 channels.
Oh, okay,
in the zone,
okay,
yeah.
okay, cool. Was that clear? Was that, I mean, it's the contacts first, then the channels, and you organize the channels into zones. And then you pick a zone and then twist the knob to pick the channels out of the zone. And there are more things. There are scan lists, there are groups that you can further organize these things, but you know, that's not really necessary. You don't need to do that once you get a radio. Can you think of anything I left out? Yep, so yeah, once you're in a zone, then you can pick from the knob. Okay, and this is a channel that I defined for the repeater. And it's sort of like, the only thing different from the channel for the hotspot is, of course, this is a 440 duplex frequency. And the color code and repeater slot, you get that from the repeater owner. So, you know, Don told, no, that was actually published on repeater,
Our Finder.
yeah, website.
It was in